Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Albert, and today I'll be presenting the paper Defending Against Neural Fake News by the following authors: Rowan Zellers, Ari Holtzman, Hannah Rashkin, Jonathan Bisk, Ali Farhadi, Franziska Rosner, and Yejin Choi. And I will be with my amazing facilitators, Lidiona Nishani and Peter Samraj. Oh, sick. Thanks. Hold up. This. Wait. Oh, okay, cool. So, since this paper is clearly about fake news, I thought we'd start off with a pretty fun game about spotting what fake and real news actually looks like. So, let's look at the first one. Link found between vaccines and autism. Who here thinks this is fake? Show of hands. Who thinks this is real?
Wait, fake and real as in machine generated versus
Okay. All these articles are human written. So some of these are like meant to be like fake news, like propaganda, and others are like actual like real news. Okay.
So we mean fake news as in truthful and
Yes.
factual.
And fake.
Yeah,
the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, don't trust me for anything.
Okay. So this is clearly fake. And if you couldn't see, I said fake there. So it's going to get trickier from here. So Kremlin amused by a report that Russia listening to Trump's phone calls. Who thinks this is real? Okay. Who thinks it's fake? It's real. Okay, next one. This one's interesting. Meet the guys who taped back Trump's papers back together. So I'll just read a little excerpt. Solomon Lartney spent the first 5 months of the Trump administration working in the old executive office building, standing over a desk with scraps of paper spread out in front of him, taping the president's notes back together. Show of hands for real? Sounds real? How about fake? It is real. That actually happened, I guess. Must have not been very fun, but okay. Here's an interesting one too. Louisiana Penitentiary to become the world's first prison staffed entirely by robots. Who thinks this is real? Who thinks it's fake? Everyone else? Okay, yeah, you're right. And the last one, okay. Small dogs pee higher to lie about their size. New study concludes. Real? Pardon? Okay. Real? True. Okay. So who thinks this is true? Who thinks it's fake? It is real. So I guess that's apparently true. So even from that, like, it was difficult for some and many of you to figure out like what was real and what was fake, right? And this is the same for machines as well, especially AI, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So what is the role of AI and machine learning in fake news? So we've seen many powerful models come out recently, especially with BERT and GPT-2, on how they can generate really realistic-looking articles that many would believe to possibly have written by humans. And as these models and NLP gets better and better, they'll be able to generate news and just excerpts as good as humans can, which is scary to many. But on the other hand, we can also utilize this powerful tool to determine what is real news and what's not real. If they can generate fake news generate news as good as humans can, maybe they can detect it even better than we can. And a very interesting quote was said by the authors: the best models for generating disinformation are also the best models at detecting it, which we'll dive into later. But how do we frame this? So we can frame it as an adversarial game. So we have an adversary, and this is what we say is generating the fake news in articles. So it's been trained on writing fake news, and in the real world, this is usually humans. So I'm sure you've seen like a lot of maybe like Facebook and how there's like a lot of fake news around, right? And they're written in the real world for two purposes. So one of them is to be viral. So maybe they want to get ad revenue or whatever, and they just want to make an article that sounds so inflammatory or crazy that you just want to click on. Or it's to be persuasive. So maybe this is to like spread propaganda. Maybe they want you to like vote for Trump or vote for Hillary or whatever. But basically, right now, it's currently predominantly written by humans. But maybe in the future, this won't be the case. And in terms of verifiers, so verifiers are what looks at the fake news or the real news and determine which category they fall in. And in this framework, we'll say that it has unlimited access to news articles. So maybe it's just taken a look at a bunch of news articles before, like you have, for example. Like I'm sure you've all read a lot of news articles in the past. And when you're looking at a new one, you have to decide if it's real or fake, right? Like you can't just believe everything you read on the internet. And you, in this case, are the verifier. But again, in the coming years, we might see machines becoming the verifiers for news websites. So this is what will lead to an arms race. So as our adversaries or our generators get better, our detectors will have to keep up, right? To determine, because if the generators generate fake news so well that the discriminators or detectors can't detect them as fake news, the detectors will just be useless, right? And if detectors get really good, then the generators will have to keep up with them too. And this is where we introduce Grover. So Grover stands for generating articles by only viewing metadata records. So I guess they just really wanted to make another Sesame Street paper, like Bert and Elmo, because they had to take the R from articles and the E from metadata, but okay. But what this paper brings is something quite novel. So it introduces both a generator and a discriminator. And the generator, which we will see, is the state of the art. It generates articles better than any other machine we've seen before, and a lot more realistic than many human articles as well. And it also is a very good fake news detector, being able to detect its own fake news at 92% accuracy, which is better than any other existing news detector. And what's novel about this paper especially is that it introduces metadata fields, nucleus sampling, discrimination, and the real news dataset, which I'll talk about later. So looking at generation, especially for NLP, there's been a lot of work done in this field very recently. So I want to just do a very quick crash course on how this all came to be. So in the very beginning, in terms of NLP and generating sequence-based models, we used recurrent neural networks. And what recurrent neural networks are is that they basically just take a sequence. And for NLP, it's a sequence of words. And they take in the input sequence, and as it goes through the sequence, it will store a hidden state, which helps it to remember what it's seen in the past. But the problem is that every time we move forward in the sequence, we modify this hidden state. So as you can see, they illustrated it very colorfully here. So if what is part of the black part, by the time we get to the question mark, a lot of the black part is already gone. And as we look at very, very large sequences, the RNN fails in that it can't remember what it's seen at the very beginning. But as we know, maybe the very beginning is very important, but it's already forgotten a lot of it. So that's why we introduced the LSTMs, long short-term memory. So basically, LSTMs try to solve this problem by kind of an analogy here would be, so you have a calendar with a lot of events, and you learn to prioritize what's important, and other events maybe you delete. So it's similar in this case, where it looks at each new event, or word in this case, and tries to see, okay, is this important, or should I forget it? And it's more complicated than that, and it uses things called gates, which I won't really go into, but it definitely improves upon the classic RNN for remembering what it's seen in the past. However, it's still not good enough. As the sequences become very long, it still fails in the sense that it can't remember what it's seen at the very beginning. So we introduced attention. And what attention is that it's like you're paying attention to something in the words you're given or the sequence you're given. We tell them, the model figures out exactly what to pay attention to when it's generating text by storing weights for every single word it looks through. So for example, if we're trying to translate from French to English, je suis étudiant, so I am a student, each word has a hidden state, which tells the model what to pay attention to as it's generating the new sequence. But then researchers discovered that RNNs just have an inherent problem. One, that the distance between words is the order of n, right? So like, je suis étudiant, there's 2 words between je suis étudiant, and it'll always be linear, right? And another problem is that you can't parallelize RNNs. So you just have to go through them one word at a time. And for very long sequences, this gets very time consuming. So we looked at convolutional neural networks. So a WaveNet and ByteNet are 2 very well-known convolutional neural networks for sequences. And basically, this solves the problem of, one, parallelization, because parallelization for convolutional networks are trivial, right? That's how they work. We can look at multiple parts of the sentence or text at the same time. And it also allows us to decrease the length between words, because the distance between 2 words is now order of log n rather than linear, right? Because it goes through this entire layer. So one thing they realized is that this doesn't account for dependencies, which is basically what they needed to focus on in the text, which brings us to today. Transformers, combining both attention and convolutional neural networks. And this has led to really, really cool results for OpenAI's GPT-2, which you've probably heard of, and Google's BERT. And these models are unprecedented. They're crazy in what they can generate and summarize and a bunch of other applications that they provide. And it's also what we're going to be looking at today.
Can I say something quickly?
Sure.
If you want to know more about GPT-2 and BERT, ACE has done talks on both of those. So you can check out the YouTube channel.
Nice. So Grover is actually a transformer. So transformers are framed after the language modeling problem. So basically, they use the previous tokens to predict the next, as modeled by this formula here. So what this formula is basically, it's giving the probability distribution of the next word given the sequence that we already have. So say we have I ate a hot something. So maybe as we look through all the different words that could go next, we create a probability distribution. So I ate a hot, maybe dog would be 80%, since it's a very probable word that could happen next. And maybe, I don't know, pancake could be at like 5%. And we just create a probability distribution for what's the most probable words that can happen after this, the text we give it. And that's how current transformers like OpenAI and BERT are, or actually OpenAI I know for sure, that's how it's modeled, that it just tries to predict the next word given the probability distribution it figures out. And what the researchers realized that for the state of the art, the model treats all text as an unstructured text field. So when they're trying to look at different pieces of text, for example, a news article, it's not accounting for the metadata fields. And that's basically what's not part of the text, of the body text. So maybe the headline, the date, the authors of the article, and this doesn't account for it because it's just straight up the entire body text. So the authors asked themselves how they can improve upon this. And they decided to introduce context in the form of metadata fields to create realistic and conditional text generation. So basically, it introduces context like domain, date, authors, and headline as part of the context, which is fed to the model and it uses that context to try to generate a sequence, specifically a news article. And the author said that these contexts help to control the body, allowing for efficient learning and generation of multi-field documents. And the way they model it is with a joint distribution which is just taking the probability of the domain, date, authors, heading, and body. So let's look deeper into how the generation actually works. So this is the training stage where the model is trained on a bunch of data to help it learn better on how to generate text. And the way it learns is to randomly drop out fields to learn unconditional generation. So let's look at an example here. So if we look at part A, we give the model the domain, the date, not the author, and the headline. And it has to predict what the body is. So in certain cases, we won't have maybe the authors. Maybe they're not provided. And the authors wanted to make it so that the model would learn how to learn unconditional generation, where maybe there is no context provided at all, or maybe there's some context, but not all, or maybe there's all the context fields are provided. And the authors just wanted the model to generalize to all different combinations of those fields. And for example, the next one, maybe that one has all four, so the domain, date, headline, and body, and needs to predict who the authors might be. And in terms of other details, the model is trained to minimize the cross-entropy loss. And other than that, it's same as the other transformers, like OpenAI's GPT-2. And the way you feed forward the text into the model and the way it tries to predict the body is we start with a field of context. So maybe we give it the domain, date, headline, and the domain, date, authors, and headline, and needs to predict the body. The way we input it into the model is with tokens. So each field has a specific start and end token. So maybe if we're talking about the date, we signify to the model that we're looking at date now by giving it the token start date. And we give it the text of the date, and then we give it the token end date. And then it knows that, OK, we're ending the date now, and now maybe it's time to move on to another metadata field. So that's how they train the model to learn joint distribution. And now if we're trying to generate the body, we'll just put start body, and then allow the model to generate its text until it reaches the end body, which we know that the model says, OK, I'm done generating what I want to generate. And finally, sampling. So we're talking about sampling from the probability distribution it provides us. And the way the authors did it is a very novel method called the Nucleus Sampling. And the way they phrase it is, at each time step, given threshold p, sample the most probable words with cumulative probability of top p% vocabulary. And for the math-oriented people here, this is the probability distribution. This is the formula they use to model it. But what exactly does this mean? So let's compare it to top K sampling. So top K sampling is a type of sampling that is used very often in NLP. So what we do is we give it the text, and it spits out a probability distribution, right? That's how language models work. And maybe for the words she said, I never blank, the model predicts the words thought, knew, had, saw, did, said, wanted, blah, blah, blah. And the top K words in that probability distribution, so knew, thought, knew, had, saw, did, those will be taken as a sample. And maybe for I ate the pizza while it was still blah, it will give us the top 5 words for that. But nucleus sampling brings us something different. So instead of providing K as a number, as we did before, here K was equal to 5, so we took the 5 most probable words. Here we provide a percentage. So here we have P equals 0.8. And what it does is it takes the top whatever number of words that probabilities sum to 0.8 or 80%. So maybe, for example, the same example as before. So she said, I never. And then maybe the probability for thought was 7%, knew was 5%, and all the way down. We would keep adding those probabilities and taking the words until we reached 80%. So maybe it would give us all that and more. And if it was a narrow distribution, so the one we see there, I ate the pizza while it was still something, maybe hot is already like 75% probability. So it's a very probable next word. And warm is maybe 5%. And since those sum to 80%, we'll take just those 2 words. And that's in a nutshell, what top P sampling is. So why nucleus or top P sampling? Well, the authors figured out that most sampling methods often either end up repeating themselves, so like saying the same sequence of words over and over again, or going very off topic, which is what we see for especially top K sampling. And they demonstrated that nucleus sampling is better for modeling human text, since sampling text from the dynamic nucleus of the distribution is how humans naturally work. And it avoids sampling the obviously wrong token. For example, like if it was the example before, in a narrow distribution, I ate the pizza while it was still hot and warm. Those two are obviously correct, right? So it avoids sampling the ones after that to avoid the wrong tokens. But in cases where the probability is very low, or a broad distribution, like thought is only 7% here, so the model isn't very confident that thought is the next word, right? There's a lot of different cases. So then we're just like, okay, we'll take the variety then. We'll take all the words that sum to the top P percentage, so that we'll be sure that maybe some of them might work. And they demonstrated the different types of sampling here. So we have human sampling. Okay, I'll explain the graph first. So here at the bottom we have how frequent the vocabulary occurs, and here we have cumulative density on the y-axis. And we graph the sampling for humans, so how a human would normally work, nucleus sampling, regular sampling, top K sampling, and the other sampling methods. And we try to compare the sampling methods, and we see that the human is the one on the top, the one in yellow. And we see nucleus sampling very close to that, closer than any of the other sampling methods, which the authors try to use this to prove that nucleus sampling is more modeled after how humans sample. And talking about discrimination, so how did the researchers adapt this very powerful model they have here they used to train the model to generate news or articles for discrimination, how to use that model to detect whether an article is real or fake. And to train this model, they used the same exact generator, and they trained that up to iteration 700,000. And at that point, they added a very special CLS token to the end of its training set. And it's a special token used in many classification texts that tell the model to aggregate the representation of the sequence. And why should the model aggregate the representation? Well, that representation is the hidden state, which then we can feed into a linear layer or a neural network to classify the article as human or machine. So basically, we have this very powerful transformer that's been trained 700,000 iterations. So you could say that it has a pretty good understanding of the English language and the semantics between it. And now we tell it to give the result it produces after looking at an article and using that to feed into a neural network to classify an article as human or machine. And that's how they decided to train this detector, which we'll see to be quite powerful later on. And now it's time to take a 5-minute break.
Are there any questions before we take a break? Clarification questions or comments people want to make?
Yes.
What is the impact of metadata? I'm trying to understand. I mean, for the generation part, does it have a huge impact? Because the metadata is just like 4 fields, right?
Right. They wanted to model this after how news articles are. So news articles will usually have domain, date, authors, and headline. So that's why they decided to use those specific metadata fields. For other use cases, it'd probably be different, but they wanted to base this paper off news articles specifically.
But just incorporating the joint probabilities with these 4 bits of information, it greatly increases the generation capacity or improves the generation of the.
Oh yeah. That's later for the results where they compare it between OpenAI's GPT-2, which does not contain these 4 contexts, and try to show how it's better in that case. Yeah.
And then the P sampling that you were mentioning, is that it relates to a narrow distribution, right?
We use it for all, like, they just used p sampling for the entire model. So it would, they want to show that it would work better in cases of both broad and narrow distribution, more than the other sampling methods that already exist. An interesting fact, actually, top p sampling or nucleus sampling is actually a novel method that was produced by one of the authors of this paper, like a month or so before this paper was published, which is really interesting.
So they just wanted to make a paper to showcase their sampling.
I guess, and also to like talk about like the other parts of the paper. But yeah.
So they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Top P sampling and nucleus sampling are the same.
Yeah, top P
I
sampling.
guess it's like you're getting down to the nuclear part
Yeah.
of the distribution.
That's what they want to call it.
Okay.
The context, including domain, author, and what else? But anyway, a list of keys. But how that domain keys are made? Why this a few features we included in the context, but not the other? For example, the location, geographic location, or the time of the paper.
Yeah.
Why don't you include those attributes to the context?
So I think
how the context was picked?
I think they didn't talk about it explicitly in the paper, but I think they were just like looking through like most of the common articles and saw that like those 4 contexts were things that most articles had. So I guess that's how they would pick it. Since like I'm pretty sure all news articles would have the date, the domain, and the author, and what was the other one? Headline. Yes.
Yeah,
oh wait, that's
those
important too.
context items
Yeah.
are what people would look at when they try to determine if something is fake or not. So I guess everything has a time. I don't know, maybe if something is posted at 1 a.m. that's suspicious.
That's true.
But I think other than that, maybe there's not as much information in the time. For example, I'm just speculating.
I guess the novelty in the paper is that metadata helps rather than what the metadata exactly
True.
is.
Yeah,
So it could be, I
because
mean,
it gives condition. Yeah, it's conditioned generation. So
Can we go back to the previous slide, please?
This one?
Yeah. I was wondering, how do they train the model? They give the input, domain, date, authors, headline, and make a separator between them. They gave all of them together to model.
Oh,
the model will generate the
In
output.
terms of training here.
Yeah.
So yeah, they trained it like how they would train a normal transformer. So if you looked into that, they basically separated the context and target into 2 different. It was like this was another part of the paper. They glossed over it really briefly, but they basically talked about how they separated the context into 2 fields and then tried to predict them one after the other. Yeah.
Do they give them at the same time to the model, or they give first the domain and then after that they select the list?
I think they just give it all at the same time.
they don't say anything.
Yeah, they don't say. Like,
Like,
they're very vague
it's a little
about.
bit vague about the training part.
And if you look at the first one,
Right.
they give the domain, date, headline, and it produces the body.
Right.
And then they use that body in the third one to create
to
a
predict
better
that.
headline.
Right.
So maybe it has several steps, yeah?
Yeah, I guess they use the targets for the other one to see if the headline, the headline generated is good. Oh yeah, so these all repeat. So maybe they're trying to see if the body they generated, if they tried to use that to get the headline, how similar that would be to the headline it was given.
They
Yeah.
generate the authors and then they use the authors in the third step to
Right.
generate a better headline.
And then to generate the headline, yeah.
So for each article they have 3 different steps.
well, it's iterative depending on what you want to optimize for.
Sorry?
It is iterative. Yeah, there are multiple steps. I don't think there's only specifically 3 steps, but
Yeah.
I think this was just like showing how their training worked.
But the first headline that they gave it, is it the real headline or is it a fake one?
no, it's so actually you can go to the website of the paper. I mean, there's a website for the paper, and you can actually play with the different fields. You can write something in the headline fields and you can generate the article. And so basically what it does is it optimizes for a higher probability of what the headline should look like. So even the fields that you put in you would get suggestions for something better.
No, but that is the trained model. What I mean for training the model, the one that you see on the website is already trained, but that one is the training phase. I'm wondering that how
So I guess
they
are
didn't mention it in the paper.
Are they just taking everything as a sequence of text? So Wired.com, that's one part of the text, and then May 29th, 2019, and then they ask the model to they treat that final body sequence of text as what you're going to predict, and then they shuffle it around.
Yeah.
So it is just like a language modeling problem where you're just doing word by word, except they replace it by larger pieces of text that are predicted. So it is just the same thing.
So in the step A, those domain, date, and headline came from the real article.
But
and then they will generate the body.
I believe, let's think of the domain, date, author, and headline as one sequence, and then predicting the third sequence, the fifth sequence of the body.
They come from the real article, yeah?
I guess you're just asking about what the training data is specifically?
No. I mean, the domain, date, and headline in the first step, in the step A, they come from the real article.
Yeah, from the real one.
They generate the body.
The body.
So the body is fake right now.
I think the body already.
Yeah, the body is
body.
Yeah.
And then they use that fake body in the second step with those things that we have.
So they have three
fake
given variables: domain, date, headline, and they are trying to predict the body, and then they use it to the next step to predict the authors.
So
and I guess why domain it's what I'm thinking, the domain it's irrelevant because perhaps the model is trained based on the articles of Wired, and it's going to predict the same kind of way of writing to this kind of domain.
So we generated a fake headline, fake body, and fake authors by getting the real headline, real date, and real domain.
And then in the end, they kind of compare the headline given in the beginning with the headline generated. Does it match?
Compare it together.
So is it a good prediction?
Any other questions?
So just one more question is that they're not generating any body of the news. They're just generating metadata. They're only training on metadata, and they're only generating metadata, only evaluating on metadata. Or are they also generating?
No, they're generating body. They're
They're using the metadata to generate
the body. That is the point. To generate the text of the whole news that can be fake.
In the first step they generated.
So I guess the headline is the most important relevant variable, so they can generate the body. That's why they compare it.
I have a question. Sorry. Okay. I missed most of the part of the talk because I was multitasking. But maybe you have covered this. But the signal, there's no signal that gets sent back to the generator, right? So even though this is like the adversarial setting, but
it's not like an actual adversary. It's more of it's not the machine learning part that's framed as a gang, but it's the way that it works in the real world, where we have people trying to make better generators and people trying to make better detectors, and they have to keep up to each other.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, using the word adversary there is maybe a bit low.
Yeah,
it's a little bit misleading. You think gang.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess if the process of generating the whole complete list of the context and the body by this process, we'll have a different result if we, for example, switch the order of a field of keys. For example, we start from the domain and data. We don't generate headline and the body, but we generate the body and then headline, and then the author. That will be a different combination, I guess. Right? Yeah, but so why the order of this keys generation follow this way rather than different ways?
So can I? So the order is fixed so that the space of possible combinations is not unfeasible to train. So they actually assume a certain order so that they can train on it with a fewer number of combinations.
So it's only assumption.
It's a way to make it possible for the algorithm to train.
Okay.
I think it was that like
Could be f factorial.
yeah, rather than I think it was 2 to the power of f instead of
Yeah.
f factorial.
Okay, so let's take a bit of a break because it seems like the questions are getting more deep and more discussion based. So we'll come back and talk about the experiments and results and then continue on the discussion.
It's good? Okay. Right.
You want to ask your question again, DJ? Yeah, I'm still not clear on how you actually train it, and this might be because I don't understand how GP2 works. So if you were given let's take the last example,
Right.
You're given the domain, the date, the authors, and the body,
Yeah.
it generates a headline, but how does it know what it should optimize over? So what's the other set of headlines that it looks at? So for example, in BERT, you typically give it a series of other sentences from the corpus, and then it tries to distinguish between the two. What is it here?
So if I can.
Yeah.
From what I read at the article, they have created their own data set from Common Crawl. Common Crawl has only news data, and they have kind of labeled it with metadata as well alongside. And they have extracted their metadata through a Python library newspaper or something. So I believe that the fact that having all those news, it was like 125 giga of data together alongside with metadata can help kind of having a specific headline and generating the body. So that is how I.
But I mean, I understand that they have a whole corpus, and you could generate one headline, and there could be many different ways to generate a very similar headline. So how does it know kind of this is optimal or it's good enough? It's not clear to me still.
For optimal, they were using Perplexity or not? That was.
Yeah, they were using Perplexity.
Yeah, for measuring the performance. In order to understand if this text is really meaningful, they are using the Perplexity as a measure, they measure it. Comparing the understanding from the human and comparing the understanding from the machine, and what they say is like kind of similar, from what I remember from the experiments. But for training, I believe like they have the corpus and they have the labels like the metadata, and then they kind of generate the body. So that is.
So I think you are asking about the training objective, like the loss function.
Yeah.
So the loss function is actually the cross interface between what they predict and the target label. Like for example, if they trying to predict the headline, so they have like something they predict in a latent space form, like a representation. So they just calculate the cross interface between what they predict and the target headline. Yeah. So that's the standard loss function.
So it's the classic transformer model. So basically they'll mascot some of these metadata and body items, and they'll try to predict what those missing parts are, and they already have a ground truth, so they'll put the cross into the loss between. And actually this happens in a sequential fashion. So the first one, they have certain things masked out, so they try to predict the author. I mean, in the first step, they're predicting the body, then the author, and then they look at the joint cross entropy loss for all of them together.
The cross entropy between the generated headline and the body.
The actual headline. They have training data, right?
Yeah, if the actual headline is the headline that we are giving in the first stage, so
So
the model will generate exactly the same one to make the loss function minimum.
So
Because
I think
I don't know
these are three separate steps. These are not fed back into each other. I think it's just like three different tasks that they optimize it for with the correct labels. That's what it seems to be in the paper. It's not like they generate the body and then feed that and generate the order in the next step. Maybe when they're actually using it for generation.
No, it is.
In the generation step maybe, but in the training step, I don't think they do that.
No, I think in this case, maybe. In the paper, it is sequential actually. So they'll generate the body, then they'll use the body to generate the author.
Yeah.
And then they'll use the author to generate a new, better headline.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I believe that they compare the performance, or they validate the performance of the model by comparing the headline in the beginning given from that from the data set that is generated from that library that I said, and then the headline that is generated from the real model, from the model that is generated in the end. So that is my understanding.
Is there an independent data set of the metadata without a body on the metadata? The first parts in this picture. Are there in a data set for purely?
Just for metadata?
Yeah, for metadata.
But what would you use it for?
Good question.
Yeah.
Just curious. May not be very useful.
Well, I'm not sure if there is one such thing. I mean, there is a database like that, but the databases that they use have everything in them. So
let's go through the results.
Okay. So experiments first. So architecture, we know that we're using transformers for Grover, and they trained 3 different models. So one of them is Grover Base, their mini one, which is pretty big, 12 layers, 117 million parameters. Grover Large, their second biggest model, with 24 layers and 345 million parameters. And finally, Grover Mega with 48 layers and 1.5 billion parameters, which is a very big model, and the same size as GPT-2. So, as we were talking before about the data set, it's called Real News. It was their own kind of created data set, their corpus. They web scraped from Common Crawl, and they limited the web scraping to 5,000 domains. So the training set would only have a bunch of news articles from only 5,000 domains. And it was interesting the way they they split the test and train data. So the train data, they had it set to articles produced between December 2016 and March 2019. So like within 3-ish years. And then the test data, they had it, they basically set the domain, the date to be April 2019. So they basically wanted to see if the model could generalize to the future. And finally, they included both article text and metadata. So they had to format the metadata themselves. And yeah, it was 120 gigabytes in size, which is really big if it's just pure text. In comparison, OpenAI's GPT-2 was trained on 40 gigabytes of Reddit data. So this is 3 times that. And so training. So how did they train? Grover, they basically just took real news of they made the article to be a length of 1,024 tokens, and they trained it for 800,000 iterations, so 100,000 more than they would train, or actually no, they trained it for 800,000 iterations. The discriminator, they trained it for 7,000 iterations, and then they trained the neural network, which I don't know how many iterations they trained that one for. And training took 2 weeks with TPU v3 cores, which is a pretty long time. So let's look at a result of their generator here. So the provider domain they gave it was WashingtonPost.com, date May 29th, 2019. And they provided the headline as US House votes to impeach Donald Trump after new evidence released from the Mueller report. And I'll just read like a sentence or so here. So the generated body they had was Washington. The House voted to impeach President Donald Trump Wednesday after releasing hundreds of pages of text messages that point to clear evidence of obstruction of justice and communication with the head of the Trump organization about a potential business deal in Russia. So I guess you can read it more if you look at the paper, but as what you can see here, like this could totally be written by a human and you wouldn't know, but it's actually written by Grover. So if we look at how the quantitative data, they evaluated the model on perplexity across both conditional and unconditional settings. So conditional is basically when you provide the model with the metadata or the context, and unconditional is if you just let it generate on its own. And so the way they evaluated perplexity, which is a very common metric for language models on their performance, is the probability of that sequence of text that it generated produced to the power of -1 over the length of that sequence. And so we can look at this graph here, which they gave us. It's a bar graph. They had perplexity mapped on the y-axis here, and the lower the perplexity is, the better the model is. And here they had it mapped conditional and unconditional, unconditional and conditional. So they wanted to compare Grover and OpenAI's GPT-2. But since OpenAI's GPT-2 isn't able to do conditional, they only had OpenAI for unconditional. And what we can see here is that, first of all, Grover performs better than OpenAI's GPT-2 since it has a lower perplexity. And also, the bigger models perform better than the smaller models in terms of perplexity, which is what we expect to see. And finally, the conditional models perform better than the unconditional models. For example, if you look at Grover Large, the perplexity for conditional is 10.9, but unconditional is 11.6. So the perplexity decreases as we make it conditional, where it's looking at the actual metadata rather than generating on its own. And they show that the performance is better. And the authors actually speculated why Grover performed so much better than OpenAI's GPT-2, and that was because OpenAI's GPT-2, the training data was from Reddit, which is not only limited to news articles, but they were using test data that was news articles. So that's maybe why it didn't perform as good as Grover. And here's the, I guess you could say, how humans see Grover. So they compared Grover against actual human-written articles, and they used their best model, so 1.5 billion parameters, and they saw that p equals 0.96 for nucleus sampling produced the best results, so they used that. And we have this bar graph here. So we have 4 different categories on the bottom. So we have human news, which is basically human real news. So news that was written by a human that is in like probably like New York Times or Washington Post or something that we would say is real news. You also have machine news. So it's Grover, I guess, conditioned on real news metadata. So maybe we would take the metadata from the human news, like Washington Post, and use that to condition our Grover model. The third one is human propaganda. So maybe it's some kind of clickbait or like random untrustworthy news source that they compared it to. And finally, machine propaganda, which is again Grover but conditioned on human propaganda. And they evaluated, or I guess who's they? They used Amazon Mechanical Turk rating. So they basically just had a bunch of people employed by Amazon Mechanical Turk to read the articles from all 4 categories. So machine news, human news, machine news generated by Grover, human propaganda, and machine propaganda generated by Grover. And they evaluated it across this scale of 1 to 3, where 1 is like the worst rating you could possibly give it, and 3 is the absolute best. And they rated it across the style, the content, and overall, and how they would rate it. So we have some very interesting results here. So if we compare human news to machine news, human news performs better. So I guess Grover isn't as really trustworthy as writing real news as actual real news is, as we can see that if we compare overall, it's 2.67 to 2.51. But if we compare human propaganda to machine propaganda, something really interesting happens. So human propaganda actually is less trustworthy than machine propaganda in all aspects, which maybe says that Grover is better than producing plausible fake news than actual humans are, which is really crazy. If we compare the overall, for example, they would rate human propaganda as overall 2.19 out of 3, and machine propaganda as 2.42 out of 3, which is quite the big difference. And it's quite monumental here, I guess, if you can say that a machine can write fake news better than humans can.
I think the propaganda is boring. If you're interesting, you're not a good propagandist.
Okay, so if we want to look at the discriminator, so that was the results for the generator that they made. The discriminator we have here. So we're trying to see how the discriminator performs against the generated articles. So this table shows on the left, they use the discriminators to predict whether the stuff the generator produces is real or not. So we use the following discriminators. So Grover Mega, which is their biggest model, Grover Large, BERT Large, and GPT-2, the 345 million parameter models as discriminators. We use BERT base, Grover base, and GPT-2, and you also use fast text. So fast text is one of the, I guess, common fake news detectors that some people use to see if an article is real or fake. And we have it against these generators are Grover, so we use the Mega, Large, and Base models, and we try to predict whether the articles are real or fake, as in machine or not machine. So we evaluate it in two ways. So we have unpaired accuracy, where we just basically give the discriminator an article and tell it and ask it, okay, is this article real or fake? And we get the accuracy from that. Paired accuracy is different, where we give it one machine-written article and one real article, and we ask it to predict which one is the machine article and which one is the real article. So if we all understand the table now, we can see our observations here. So the model performs significantly better on the paired setting, where we're given two articles, and we have to predict which one's more real and which one's fake or machine-generated, versus unpaired, where we just give the model one, and it has to predict which one, whether it's real or not. And as you can see here, for example, we're trying to compare how Grover Mega performs against its generator. It has an accuracy of 97% for paired accuracy, but unpaired is 92%. And as we can see, all the percentages for paired accuracy are a lot higher than unpaired accuracy. And what the author said this meant was that the model would be better at determining which articles sound human than creating like a decision boundary between what human and machines actually mean, or a human written article and a machine written article would actually be. The second conclusion we can draw is that in this adversarial race, or like how we can use detectors to predict whether articles are real or fake, the model size is very significant. So if we use a smaller discriminator, for example, Grover Large, which has 345 million parameters, against the Grover Mega generator, we see that the accuracy is 81% or 80.8%. And if we look at a larger discriminator, so maybe Grover Mega performing against its smaller like brother, Grover Large, it performs at 98.5%. So the model size is a very high predictor on whether it can whether it can determine if news is real or fake, and its overall performance in general.
The BERT base and BERT large models, they are also trained over the same time period over which the Grover model was trained. So if, say, the Grover model was trained over a period of 3 years.
Oh no, they just used BERT, like the BERT model. Yeah, they didn't retrain BERT.
But the Grover was trained only on 3 years.
Yeah, so they just took the models as is, but they used 2016 to 2019 training data for Grover specifically.
So the reason I asked that is because if you do an out of time validation kind of thing, like take some domain and something which is out of that 3 year period,
yeah,
it may not perform as much as
that is true too.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So basically, he was asking whether BERT was also trained on the data time frame as Grover was. So we know that Grover was trained on the news articles written between 2016 to 2019, March 2019, and he was wondering if BERT was trained on that same data as well. They didn't specify in the paper exactly, so I'm assuming that they just used BERT. Pardon? They didn't? BERT? Yeah, they didn't train, yeah. So they just like used whatever, I guess, Google provided to them. Yeah, the pre-trained model. Yeah. And finally, we can see that Grover is the best at detecting its own fake news. So maybe we can compare the models with the same number of parameters. So 345 million parameters, all these three models have. So if we look at their performance across maybe Grover Mega, we'll see that Grover Large has the highest performance by far. And the authors speculated that this is possible to something known as exposure bias. So why did Grover perform so much better than these models? It's because of something called exposure bias, where by limiting the variance using sampling, it actually leaves some artifacts which its discriminator can pick up on and see the stuff that are left behind and figure out whether it's real or fake better than the models that wouldn't have the advantage of exposure bias. So the authors wanted to show future work that could be done in this field, since they wanted to show how Grover could be used to enhance the field. So in terms of pure text generation, they said that there is work done on generating text in any order, and they said that that might be able to evade Grover. But other than that, the paper didn't really specify any other direction to improve the current state of the art. I mean, I guess transformers are really new, and they are like the state of the art and perform better than like anyone would have thought. So further work on how to improve that is still unclear. So we're still finding what that is. And the discriminators. So they had some interesting stuff to say about this. They wanted to figure out if we could actually incorporate knowledge into the discriminator. So like facts and fiction. So right now the discriminator, all it looks at is like the form and the context, right? Like how the article is written. But what if we could actually incorporate knowledge? So maybe it has some knowledge base of what's real and fake, which it would be really difficult to create, and I'm not sure how to do that. And the article and the researchers were speculating about that too. But if we could somehow integrate knowledge into the discriminator, that would create an actual fake news detector that would look at the way the news was written as one factor, and also whether it's the facts or what's written is actually true or not. So incorporating both of them would actually create a real fake news checker. And they also want to scale progress to all types of news and mediums. So right now, this only scales to news articles, right? But what if we could scale it to different types of text as well to see what's really real and what's fake? And finally, they made a bold claim that news platforms like Facebook and other news article domains should use models like Grover to filter out human-written fake news. And of course, this could cause a lot of controversy. For one, if there's false negatives. So if the model predicts the article to be fake news when it's really not, like what would that make? How would people react to that? And also possible social biases. So maybe the model filters out maybe like Trump news about Donald Trump more than like other news articles, and targets those especially because of the biases of the data it's trained on. What would that do, right? So the authors recommended that, but they said there would be some very difficult challenges to face. So the key takeaways. This model presented something very novel, and we have to see how we can, what we learned from it, right? So we see that we can now create realistic and conditioned fake news more trustworthy than human-written propaganda, as shown in the chart before, where Amazon Mechanical Turk rated Grover fake news as more trustworthy as actual propaganda. And also, the way we want to model fake news is as an adversarial race, where when the generators improve, the discriminators improve as well. Grover uses context in the form of metadata fields, field-specific tokens, and nucleus sampling to improve upon its predecessors. So basically, this is what's novel, and that's what it brings. Also, the models perform significantly better on the paired setting than unpaired setting, which tells us that the model is probably better at learning what articles sound more real than actually creating a decision boundary. And finally, at this state of time, Grover is the state of the art at generating and detecting its own machine-generated news. So, onto the discussion. One very important part of this paper was how they framed the release strategy. So, they provided these reasons to what they did. Fake news generators are a real threat to our society, but they're also the solution. It's not very difficult to train a fake news generator with enough resources. So I think they used couple tens of thousands of dollars to train Grover, and they said that people with organizations, maybe with malicious intent, would be able to do that quite easily with the resources they have. And finally, it's important to release generators to help with the creation of better discriminators. And so this was their public release. We decided to make Grover Base and Grover Large publicly available. Interested researchers may also apply to download Grover Mega and Real News. So this is in direct contrast to how OpenAI released their GPT-2, where they said that they were scared that releasing this generator would do bad things to society, and they wouldn't release the full version. So does anyone have any thoughts on the points that the researchers presented and whether it's actually valid or not, or would it just create harm to society?
There are good sides of it. I mean, in terms of being able to detect fake news.
Right.
So, because, like you're saying that, we're saying that whenever there is a fake article that is coming in, then the machine is doing quite a good task in terms of identifying whether it's a fake article or not. Then, in that ways, it is the benefit of it, and yeah, it has its disadvantages also. That people can use it and bring out fake articles, but then it's like in the beginning of the slides we said it's always a race.
Yeah.
That when there will be fake articles created, then there will be detectors also that will be coming and that will also start improving. And the presence of one does not necessitate the absence of the other.
Right.
So both should be there. For the larger good, it should be out.
Sorry?
For the larger good, it should be out.
Yeah. I guess if we wanted to make better detectors, by releasing these generators, we can help to make it so that we can have the best discriminators possible, right? And I think another argument here is that why would they do this? I think it's mostly for other researchers, right? Because most people making these fake news generators would be people in the NLP field, right? Like working deeply and researching on how to actually make these models. And sure, there would be maybe malicious actors in this field as well, but the overwhelming majority would be researchers, right? Trying to improve the state of the art for NLP and produce new interesting research. So they're just trying to send a signal to researchers that, hey, if you're wondering, like if it's any irrational fear to not want to send your like public models out into the wild and see like what damage it causes, it can actually bring a lot of good to research as well. And there's another argument that maybe, okay, if we say this, then maybe malicious actors would just not release their generators, right? And then due to the exposure bias, if they don't release their generators, then it will be harder for us to actually detect their fake news. But that also comes back to the argument of if like no one releases their generators, then like our discriminators aren't going to be very good either. But if we all compile our resources to make what's best, then it will benefit society like by outweighing the negatives of releasing these generators as well. So that was their argument, and I think I would agree. What do you think? Does anyone here disagree?
I'll say something. I do think it's
better to release something that's in the world so we can iterate and improve.
Right.
The more open research is, the more quickly progress will be made. But I think with OpenAI is when they chose not to release the model, it caused quite a stir. And you can argue if it was their intention or not, but it did start a conversation over the safety of machine learning models just in general. Because at the moment, there's really no process in place at all for evaluating the safety of AI technologies.
Yeah.
So they started a conversation that I think is important by doing that.
Yeah.
Even if that wasn't their intention.
Some people said they did that just to create publicity for their model.
Yeah,
too.
well, it works.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I feel like at the moment, I more agree with OpenAI because at the moment we don't have a set process that's we're not okay they have this there's no regulation about it.
Right.
So if someone gets their hands on GPT-2, they don't need. There's no people that are using GPT-2 to combat GPT-2,
right?
If that makes sense. Let's say I'm just playing around and I put out a large amount of fake news. There's no regulation at the moment that's trying to track it down.
I think a good analogy could be I have a gun company and I create a really good gun that can penetrate most gun defense systems.
Right.
And I also create the defense system that can stop that particular gun.
Right.
And I'm going to sell both of these and I'm doing good for the society.
Right.
Anyway, I'm touching on some really sensitive topics, gun control and stuff. But I'm not quite sure if I don't really buy their argument on if that's going to make better because these models are trained on extensive resources and they require a lot of money. So you need to have those resources to create fake news, but also to detect it.
Right.
So there is a big buy-in to get access to both the discriminator and the verifier.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if the common man or people who are people who are interested in verifying something, I don't know if they can actually invest that much.
Really invest into the research.
Yeah.
So
as of now,
enthusiasts.
There's not really many.
Only big company can invest in this research.
Yeah.
So the one that perhaps can create propaganda. So
that's true too.
So
but how would you recommend how would you recommend for them to change their release method then? Would you say they wait until
they can have some vetting or
pardon?
Vetting at which company they release it or not making it open to everybody.
Well, that's the OpenAI.
Yeah, the way of doing it.
I'm not sure. I don't know the solution.
Yeah.
But it's tricky, honestly.
For sure.
What are the other discussion points?
Here.
I'm curious.
Okay. Okay. I just did a brain dump of all the thoughts I had while reading this paper. So I actually emailed one of the writers of this paper asking about perplexity, and I asked him actually sampling too. So one of them was sampling, one of them perplexity. So I asked about the sampling method that he used, which was nucleus sampling. So the novel one that he brought into this space. And I asked him how we can reduce exposure bias. And he said at this moment, we don't have a way to do this. And there's advances being done in the field to try to see how we can improve our sampling methods to reduce that. But I don't know, I was just wondering if anyone here has explicitly looked into sampling and has any thoughts about that. Nope. Okay. Yeah, okay. Another interesting point was the model size playing a big role in the performance of the verifier, right? So we see that if it's a smaller model for the detector and a bigger generator, then it performs poorly, but vice versa, it performs really, really well. But how can we ensure that everyone has access to these powerful discriminators, right?
Yeah, that was our question.
Yeah.
About the resources.
Right,
so.
and that's why I also wondered if we can use methods like pruning or methods to train smaller models more efficiently, that we can get them to the masses, and it would be less resource intensive to actually have people implement them. Maybe you would have a hard time implementing a 1.5 billion parameter model, but it's like you've managed to shrink it down so that like common people could have access to it. How would like we go about that?
So actually, YouTube has a deep neural network. Whenever you upload something,
Right.
The network runs over the video to check if there is any objectionable content in the video, and that's how it controls anything that goes on live on YouTube. So I mean, YouTube is basically like a tech company that has the ability to do that, but the problem is that most news publishing websites, maybe they're getting up to speed with the current state of the art in technology, but they're not. They don't really have the capability to run these models and check if a news article is fake or not.
Right. So how would they, as like generators get more rampant, right, and people can begin to generate more fake news, how would these like domains go about regulating this? How would they regulate their websites?
I mean, I'm just thinking from the perspective of like, let's say I want to generate fake news.
Right.
And then like, I think it's mostly about the target audience of the fake news. And they might be people that if I literally took, let's say, I don't know if it's like cbc.ca or something, like let's say I just had like cbcc dot like com or something like that, like that's very similar.
Okay.
And then they couldn't tell. Like I just buy the domain and like populate it.
And
with like
and people were gonna read
yeah,
your news.
we're stupid people.
You think this whole thing is going to go the way
You're
of
gonna
spam?
get
The way of
audience.
spam.
You're gonna
Yeah.
steal the audience.
It essentially is spam.
Right.
Like if you think of it, and spam is kind of becoming a non-existent problem. Like you think like so the like and the way I kind of think spam because collectively a lot of people rate spam and it comes to everyone.
Right.
They kind of give that feedback. So is something like that a possibility here?
Okay. But I guess like I think the state of spam is that like when you get a spam email, like it's very obvious that it's spam, right? Like if you read it, it's probably like someone like from like some random foreign country. That's
Spam with this thing.
yeah. You could probably generate some pretty good spam.
Bring spam back.
Yeah. Yeah. This could make spam like actually possible to like fool people, right? Like I don't know, like in terms of spam emails that like are sent out, like the algorithms to like detect them aren't too complicated because right now spam is like pretty easy to detect,
Yeah.
right? Like
But this, this kind of model are good at handling, for example, news and propaganda. But if, for example, we input poems to the model, the machine-generated poems and the human-generated poems would be very easy to tell because poem carries a lot of information. But this model, the machine-generated articles don't carry a lot of information. The spams, I think, I don't agree with VJ. I think spams carries information. And this model, this machine-generated articles don't carry so much information. Also, spams carries bad information, but it is information. But this kind of articles don't carry anything.
What do you mean?
So this kind of these machines don't make this spam problem worse. Spams are still spam. Just the spams and this article. The spams are just points. There are different types of articles, different types
It
of.
depends on what kind of data you're training on. This model is training on the news data, so that it generates news. But what if you have like big, larger spam database, and you train a whole model on the spam, will generate like the spam-like articles or like spam-like text to fool people. And also for the point we're like talking about, that people actually generate like all kinds of like style of tests just by like changing the different style of like database they're training on.
Is it okay? Is it possible that the machine can generate poems?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But those points, I guess, I'm not an expert.
And you can also generate like specific to what kind of author you want, like what kind of style of author you want to like generate on. Like you can do style transfer. You can do a lot of stuff.
I think it again goes to the same thing that when you have this part of it where it is going to train on spam and create more spam, you will also have that released out and there will be an automated way to block it also. So like right now in your mailbox, if you have spam and you flag it, then this is spam, then it automatically starts sending some of it into the spam folder. So likewise, there will be the presence of this in an open environment. It essentially means that there will be some way of blocking that spam which will be created by it.
Okay, I think I have one thing to add to the spam thing though, because I think spam has a very specific, like, let's say they want to spam you for money and they have a phone number, they have like an email that you specifically, they have specific instructions that you probably need to do. But whereas for the news, it doesn't have to be accurate to my needs. Let's say I'm sending out spam. I actually care if the reader can understand.
Can click into the link, I guess, so you can get the information.
Yeah, I actually care if they can action on it, whereas if I'm generating news, I don't really care.
You just read it out.
But that's essentially I agree with that. That's essentially that's my thought too.
So interesting spam conversation. I encourage you all to talk about it more offline. Does anybody want to add any points to the discussion? Maybe people who haven't said anything yet?
There's a question on.
Okay, perfect.
Oh yeah. So, there are two questions.
Come a bit closer.
So, okay. First question is, the paper mentions adversarial filtering and oversampling and selecting a subset of generations as a future direction for generation. Did the team look into what that method is?
I think they just mentioned that like very briefly. Yeah. I don't think they talked about that in depth.
Okay. What are your thoughts on ensembles of language models to do fake news verification? Smaller, less well-founded domains could protect by taking pre-trained models and having them vote on fake versus not. Did that make sense?
I guess they're just saying using ensemble might help.
Yeah. For
That's a good
voting,
point.
yeah.
I think for sure. Like if you just combine like a lot of good fake news detectors and
As a classifier,
right.
You can vote.
But how does that help with less well-founded domain? Why is that relevant?
I think they're talking about using pre-trained models and then not having
the doing from scratch.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so if no one else wants to address the rest of the discussion points, then we can wrap up the session for tonight. But definitely continue the conversation with Albert afterwards if you are interested. So yeah, let's thank our facilitators, and let's also thank our speaker, and also our host. So, thank you.
Thank you.